Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us on the first of the three finance presentations we are going to roll out, part of our Things You Wish They Taught in School series. Each month we'll be covering a different topic, and we will have experts from the different fields guide us through topics that we want to learn a little bit more about. And today we have the pleasure of having Nick Linford and Justine Foreman from Hilltop with us today. We'll be talking about knowing your credit score. After the session is done, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask whatever you would like to Nick and Justine. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Nick and Justine.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So thanks for inviting us. We're from a bank, so we talking about this kind of stuff. This is what we do all day, and so we're excited to do that. We want to be kind of informal, so if you have a question in the middle or whatever, let us know. We know we'll probably have a wide variety of people with different knowledge about this stuff, and so, you know, this presentation, we can form it to what you guys want to talk about, but so feel free to interrupt at any point and ask us questions. To kind of go through what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about the credit report and then credit scores. And we'll talk about why they're important, how they affect us in our everyday life, and then maybe some alternative ideas about credit reports and credit scores. And then hopefully some questions. So, but you don't have to tell the end again to ask any questions. So I'd like to be a little interactive. I hope we can do that, but not to be better than just listening to me talk, that's for sure. But so, you know, just to gauge maybe where we're at with everybody, does everybody know what a credit report is?
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Could you say that again?
This is Lori, and I said yes, I think I do.
Is typically on a credit report, Lori?
I'm sorry?
Do you know what type of information is typically on a credit report?
Typically, any loans that you have and any credit cards that you have. And on those also, any ones that you've closed out or paid off.
Okay, yeah, very good. Has everybody seen their credit report? Has anybody not seen their own credit report? Well, what I wanted to kind of maybe do is I'll show you one of the credit Experian. There are three. There's Experian, TransUnion, Equity.
Seem to have lost your audio.
Can you come help me with this, Abby? I don't know. Sorry, technical difficulty. We'll hopefully get it shared here. So how do I need to exit full screen?
You should not. Let's see. Just click on share, and then click application. Hopefully that works. Let's go to your green tab. There you go.
Oh, okay. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is from Experian. You can actually get this off their website, but it's a good little tool to kind of see what type of information. So it's going to have, of course, your name, social security number, previous addresses that you've lived at, including your current address, date of birth. So really just information that, represents you as you. Um, and then it'll have public records. So if there's ever been a bankruptcy or if you've been sued or those type of things, it may show up on your credit report. And then kind of what Lori was saying, it'll show your accounts. So here's an example of an open account. It looks like it's a mortgage. And this is the information that'll show. So the original amount that was borrowed, the high balance, the term, what kind of loan it is. It's shown here, real estate. Is it current? So right here, that means that all of your payments are coming in on time, your payment amount. And then the payment history. These green OKs mean this person's paying on time. And then it'll show revolving account. So here's another one, credit card, same type of information. It'll show, again, like Lori said, closed accounts. So this one's closed, and we'll see down here in the history, the green was when they were paying and then it closed. And so there's no information there and it's closed. It'll also show negative information. So this one, they paid pretty well for a while, but then they went 30 days late and then 60 days late. And so it shows derogatory, and it shows here that they're past due 60 days. And so that's going to stay on a report. And then, eventually, if we don't make our payment, then it'll eventually go to a collection account, which is really derogatory, which obviously we don't want any of that information on there. A credit report will also show when you get credit inquiry. So if you go to the Macy's, or I guess Macy's isn't here anymore, but one of the department stores, and they say, would you like to apply for credit? And you apply, that inquiry, whether you get a card or not, is going to show up on your credit report. Now, medical information. Now, this is maybe a little tricky. It's not going to show, hey, I broke my arm and I went to the doctor to get it fixed. But if that account goes to a collection, then that will show up. So it'll say that you owe somebody money and you haven't paid it. So that'll show up, and that could be a derogatory piece of information on there. So, so any kind of questions about, I'm gonna unshare that. Any questions about that information that is found on a credit report? Does anybody know how it gets there? How does it get onto the credit report?
I assume creditors send in reports.
Yeah, exactly right. So when you apply for credit, it'll have an address that gets reported. When you take out a loan, as your payments are being made, they send that information to the credit bureaus. Now there's the three main credit bureaus, again, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, and creditors can report differently to each one. So they might report maybe only to one and not to another one. Or they might report to two, but not the last one, or any mix of the three. They might report to all three. And so information on each credit bureau or each credit report from each of the bureaus is going to be a little bit different usually. And so, that's why it's important. And we'll talk about this a little bit later about protecting your report and protecting your score, but it's important to know what's on all of them because they're not necessarily the same. So if you've got one that's got, hey, all my information's good, but you've never looked at the other two, there might be some stuff on there that's not great. One thing to think about on a credit report is that there's something like 40% of them have some type of mistake. So whether it's a, address typed wrong or a previous name typed wrong, those things aren't probably the end of the world, but it could be something really bad, like somebody else's information getting reported on your credit report. And so it's damaging your report and your score. And so it's important to know what everything that's on your report, so you know that it's 100% accurate. And that's really going to, have the best benefits for you long term. So I guess the question would be, now that we've kind of talked about it, you guys are ideas? So there's a lot of different parties that use it. So when you're applying for credit from a lender, they're going to look at that. And the reason they want to see it is, again, past performance is oftentimes a good indicator of future performance. So they want to know, hey, if I give them this money to buy this car, are they going to pay it back? And they might not know you. And so it's tough to say, well, yeah, they'll pay me back. But if they can look back at how previous things have been handled on your credit report, hey, they've always made on-time payments, for the last, 10 years, then that's a good indication. That is one of the people who want to look at a credit report. But there are other ones. So insurance companies might. Now, insurance companies you're not borrowing money from them, but they might want to look at your credit report too, because again, it could have an indication of what type of behavior you engage in. Are you a risky person? Are you someone who takes care of your responsibilities or not? That a credit report can help be an indication of that. And so that can happen. And then, another big one is employers. So often when you apply for a job, you'll sign something at the beginning that says, yes, I give this person or this company authorization to do a credit check on me. Now, you don't have to sign that, but you probably won't get the job if you didn't sign it, because again, they want to see how do they handle their responsibilities. And so an employer is often very interested in a credit report. And so, we tell presentations like this, we talk about maybe linking it to like a resume, right? So your resume has information about you, your skills, your abilities, your previous successes, why you're a great candidate. But then to go along with this, your credit report's kind of like a second resume. It really shows, hey, here's how I handle my responsibilities. I pay things on time. I don't overextend myself. I'm able to handle credit, responsibly. And so it kind of those things go hand. And so it's important that when you're thinking that we number one, make sure that everything on it's accurate. And then number two, we're doing all the things that we can to make sure that it doesn't have anything derogatory, that the only information on it is good information about you and your responsibilities. So that's kind of the first part, is the credit report. But there's another part that's maybe people think about when they think of credit. My credit's good or my credit's not so good or whatever. It's normally maybe not the report, it's the score. And so I'm going to toss it over to Justine. She's going to talk a little bit about the report, or excuse me, about the score, unless somebody has a question. Okay, go ahead, Justine. So she's working on getting her video linked up. As soon as she's done with that, we'll get you to Justine. Apologize.
Can everybody hear me and see me now?
Yes.
Thank you. So what is a credit score? Does anybody know?
It's kind of like a grading or rating, like an excellent would be an A and the next level down would be a B. And
That's right, Lori. So in some ways,
good.
it's like a GPA, similar to how a credit report is like a resume. This is kind of like a GPA. It's a cumulative number that represents how well you have done with your credit and paying back loans in the past. So it's also going to be a predictor of how likely you are to financially be responsible for future loans. So one of the things, you know how that works. So a credit score, it's comprised of various calculations. 35% is based, 8% is based on outstanding debt and how much credit is already available, even if not used. 15% is based on length of time the consumer has had credit. 10% is based on the amount of inquiries into a report, and 10% is based on the current types of credit. So you see that there's a few different factors that come into play there. Are there any questions over that?
Here's one question, Justine. If you look at the bottom of the Q&A, we have John asked, is it limited to 7 years back?
Go ahead.
But, like I said, it could be longer. And then, inquiries are usually on there for 2 years and then they fall off. And so there's kind of a different time schedule. But if there's something derogatory, like a late payment, or, it's 30 days late or something, that usually does come off after 7 years. But some of the more derogatory stuff might be on there longer. Good question.
Thank you for the question, John. So to begin building credit history, there's several ways to do it, but one important way would be to open a checking or savings account. And lots of times people encourage that you get a secured card with a low limit, so that way you can begin building credit that way through your bank. The other way, would be obtaining a small loan for a vehicle. And, it doesn't have to be excessive. And lots of times people will have a co-signer to help them out. And that's somebody with better credit that, is financially responsible and is willing to help you out. So a credit score is a number between 300 and 850. And a credit score of 720 or greater will enable you to be approved for a loan more easy. So Lori mentioned that it's kind of a way to grade people. So a 720 would be a pretty darn good grade. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is, how do I raise my credit score? Because that's something that maybe people are interested in doing. So the first thing would be, paying your bills early, or at least on time and in full every time you do pay. The other one is, as Nick mentioned, checking your credit report annually. That way you can review it for any inaccuracies and catch them early to kind of make sure that everything's on par as it should be. Another way is watching for warning signs of troubled credit. So this could include things such as only being able to make the minimum payment, paying late, or using credit for everyday expenses. You shouldn't always be using your credit card unless you can't afford to pay for it. And then finally, sticking to a spending plan. A budget is the first step to financial freedom. That's a huge takeaway, and eventually we'll have another course at the end of the month that will really focus on budgeting in the real world. So that would be a good class to take also. So credit scores can change depending on several factors. This includes how much available credit you have, how much of that credit you have already used, how you've been paying or not paying your debts, and if you've declared bankruptcy or owe taxes or have a judgment and a lawsuit showing on your credit report. So there's lots of different things that really, again, factor into how well your credit score is and how it will change. Are there any questions over that?
John asks, score will differ between the 3 entities, all use the same percentage for each factor?
Okay, good. Another good question, John. So yeah, they're all going to be a little bit different. Every bureau is going to be a little bit different, and the algorithm that is used to generate the score could be a little bit different. And so, even if you have on-time payments and they're all reporting the same thing, your scores may not be all the same. So it's pretty rare that all, actually, in my experience, that all three of them are the same. They're usually different numbers, and it's just, just the way the timing of how things are reported, the algorithms are all a little bit different. That's why there's three bureaus. When you do a mortgage loan, they look at all three. Some other loans, they might only look at one, and that's part of the reason they want to look at all three, is because they can differ. And so, yeah, that's a great question. And that's why, looking at all three of them is so important, because you could have two really good ones and then one that's way lower, and you think, okay, there's got to be something wrong with this. It should be at least in the ballpark of the other two.
Thank you again for the question. And if you're wondering why Nick is answering the questions and I'm not, it's because Nick deals with credit a lot more than I do. I'm the marketer at Hilltop Bank, whereas he's the sales. He sees a lot more credit than I do. And he's also done this presentation a few more times than I have. So my one final note would be that the credit score is based on all the information from your credit report. So keeping track of the information is very important to ensure that it's accurately reflecting your credit worthiness. And so credit worthiness is ultimately going to be what helps you in the future with obtaining any loans that you wish to have. So that's all I really have, unless there are any more questions, and I'll toss it back over to Nick.
Thanks, Justine. Yeah, I just want to mention maybe a couple more things about building your credit. I would assume that, that's what, one, credit card, that's okay. I'm not telling you to get more credit. I'm just telling you that can affect your score. But if that credit card, the biggest thing about credit cards is how you use them. And so you want to keep your utilization below 30% of your total approved value, even if you're going to pay it off every month. So if I have $1,000 credit card, I don't want to max that out to $1,000. Even if I'm going to pay it all off and not pay any interest, you say, well, I paid it off a month. It still shows that you're maxing out your credit card. And the algorithm will look at that and say, hey, they're maxing out their credit, and it'll ding your score. Your score will come down because of that. And so, at anything above 30%, you start taking a hit on your credit score a little bit. And so, if it gets above 50%, then the hit's even bigger. When you max it out, it really can affect your credit score. And so you might say, well, what's the point of having a credit card limit of 1,000 if I can only use 300, a little over 300 on it? Well, you can certainly use all of it, but if you're trying to build your score, you want to keep it lower. And the reason for that is the algorithm says, okay, how much of their available credit do they have to utilize? One of the indications of maybe getting into financial trouble is if you have to max out credit cards to survive. So that's kind of the thinking behind the algorithm. And so, keeping that utilization low, then making payments on time is the number one thing that's going to build your score. And it's not a quick fix, but that's the biggest factor is your credit history. So how long you've had credit, and then during that time, have you made on-time payments? That's going to be the number one factor. And so, rebuilding credit, usually, there's a process to it. But if you're making on-time payments, then you're going to be able to improve that. Any more questions about the credit score before we move on maybe to the next part? Oh, I see another one here. So the question is, so is it best to maximize your credit limit and keep the credit debts as low as possible? So maybe I'm confused about the question. Is it best to maximize your credit limit? Can you explain maybe what you mean by maximize your credit limit? I don't understand that.
On your cards, I mean, you could keep asking for your credit limit to be raised.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's one way you could do it. If you had a card and it had a $500 limit, but you continually spent $250 on a month and you were paying it off, it probably makes sense to get that limit raised a little bit so that the utilization doesn't go down. Yeah, that's a good point. And that thing where we'll get confused too is they say, hey, wait a minute, I had a credit card, I had a balance, I did really good and I paid it off and I closed the credit card and now my score went down. Why would I get punished for that? And the reason for that is, again, goes back to that utilization. So every single account is looked at. So if I have one card and I maxed it out, that's going to ding me. But my overall credit utilization too. So if I have 3 cards and I go beyond 30% of my total utilization, it's also going to ding my score a little bit. So you kind of have to watch that. So did that answer your question, John? Good question.
Yes. Now, would it be better then in that situation to spread that debt over the 3 cards so that each one of them come under that 30% mark that you're trying to aim for?
Right. Yeah, it could be. It could be. That would be something from the utilization standpoint. That would certainly help. Is that the right thing to do for you? You'd have to. There's other factors, obviously. If you were carrying balances, interest rate, and cost of transferring. Because usually when you transfer balances, there's a fee. So there's other things to think about. That it might be worth just trying to pay that down as quick as you can. That might be the cheapest option. Just your best, but from the utilization standpoint, that might be a better, good option. Any other questions? Well, I wanted to talk, we can move on. If you come up with a question again, just interrupt me. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, kind of the cost of your credit score and really long-term, what that can do financially. And so, one of the things, if you needed credit, you needed to borrow money, say you wanted to buy a home or a vehicle, where your credit score is typically going to be what interest an example that I did, just some quick math. So a $25,000 car, if you were buying that and you were borrowing $25,000, A+ credit currently, you could over the 72-month loan, could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,500 in interest over that whole life of the loan. But with credit, that's not good, that we would consider, lower credit and have to have a higher interest rate. That number could climb, to, over $7,500. So we're talking about $6,000 over the life of a loan. You're getting the same vehicle paid off in the same amount of time. Everything is exactly the same except for how much you end up paying for it. And so, that can really be costly. Now, if you take that from a car and put it on something big that's really long-term, like a mortgage, we're talking more like, $80,000 to $90,000, just depending on where the rates are. But just I did some quick math earlier. It's really substantial. And again, you're paying the house off in the same amount of time. Yeah, it's the same exact house, nothing different about it, but you're paying way more money because your credit score, when you borrowed the money, caused you to have a higher rate or a lower rate. And so you're going to end up paying a lot less. And that would be obviously ideal. borrowing money is necessary sometimes, but when you do it, you definitely want to pay the least amount for the borrowed money in the form of an interest rate. And so having a score that qualifies you for the best interest rates is going to save you a lot of money, over the life of the loan, and then, over your lifetime as well. And so that's why we really, like talking about this, because it's got real world implications for everybody. And it's not just a one-time thing. I early in my life, I needed it. Now I don't. I mean, we need it throughout our lives. Same thing with health or insurance. Their insurance rates could be different based on the credit score. And so I think somebody's coming in a couple months to talk about insurance. So plug for them. You should listen to that one too. But any kind of those type of things, it's just it could be more expensive for you to do that. So any other questions about the score? Are we kind of answering what you thought or what you were hoping to get out of this when you logged into the Zoom here? I don't want it to end and think, oh, we should have talked about that. If you have something you were hoping to get out or something you wanted to know, please let us know and we can talk about it.
My video is not working, Nick, but I have a question. I know that a lot of people, when they shop, they hear it all the time at the register when they're checking out, if they would like to apply to a store card. What do you think would be the best route for someone who's starting to build their credit? Should they opt in for they know they always shop at a Target. Should they apply for a Target card, or should they stop by a bank like Hilltop to apply for a credit card? What would be the best way for someone to build their credit?
Yeah, great question. So someone who's starting out and is trying to build their credit, again, I think the one thing about this is you don't want to necessarily trade a good score for having a whole bunch of debt that's difficult to pay for. And so, I'm not saying don't use a department store card or whatever, but what I am saying is oftentimes that can lead people into trouble. Everyone's heard stay away from credit cards. If you're a Dave Ramsey fan, right? He says cut them up and don't use them and all those things. And there's wisdom in that you're not going to get in a lot of consumer debt, right? So you buy a bunch of clothes on credit and you think, well, I'll pay it back over time. You're paying a lot of interest on that. Sure, it could build your credit, but is it worth all the interest you're building? What I suggest people do to build credit is to, especially if they have no credit, to get a secured credit card. And, most banks offer those, and they'll give them to people without any credit or maybe poor credit in the past, because it's secured, which essentially means you give money to the credit card company. They hold that money as collateral in the event that you don't pay. And so then they give you a credit card, and then just put little things on it, like maybe put your gas on it, something you're going to pay for anyway. You're not going to pay in, you have to have gas to drive around. You're going to buy it anyway. You can pay that off. It doesn't, it keeps your utilization low. And so that would be my recommendation. It's really easy at the department stores, and they say, we'll give you $10 off if you apply for the credit card. But those are, every time you do that, that's a hit on your credit score. That also, if you have a whole bunch of cards, it might be easier to say, well, I'll just put it on the credit card and pay it back in a couple months. But that's how people get into trouble. And so that would be my recommendation. Does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
How about managing their credit? What would be the best way that people can keep track of their credit score? Would it be online, in person?
People handle that differently. Some people pull all three of them at once. And you can go to annualcreditreport.com and you can get all three of them, or you can pick one and then, 4 months later, get another one, and then 4 months later, get another one. So you kind of spread it out over the year, however you want to do that. But going there and looking at that does raise a good question, though. There's a lot of companies, and we've all heard the commercials about credit scores and checking your credit and Credit Karma and all those things. And oftentimes those scores are different than what you're going to get when you go to a bank. They use a little bit different algorithm again. And so it's pretty rare that someone says, hey, I checked my Credit Karma and it was, 700, and then they come into the bank and apply for a loan and it's also 700. They're usually different. And so just be aware of that if you're using one of those things. Now, if you go to annualcreditreport.com, you can get your report for free. It doesn't include your score for free, but you can check to make sure nobody's stealing your identity, using your identity for their own credit purposes. And then, if you want to pay for the score, they charge a little bit. I don't remember what it is, but at least you'd know that all the information on there is correct. And then if you find something that's not, you can dispute it directly with the credit bureau and say, hey, this isn't mine. They'll begin to do investigation into it. And if it's really not yours and they can show that, then it'll come off your credit report.
Is there such thing as checking your credit score too often?
So you don't actually, that's a good question. You don't get a hit on your credit if you look at your own credit. So there are services, you can sign up for them through the credit bureaus or whatever. If you're looking at your own score, you doing it, it's not going to affect your credit at all. If there are a whole bunch of credit agencies that you're applying for credit a whole bunch of places, even if you don't get the credit, just by applying, it will affect your credit score. The exception to that would be if you're shopping for a home or a vehicle. And so there might be, 6 inquiries from a mortgage lender within a week period. The algorithm shows that as you're shopping around, they're not going to hit you every time. It'll be one inquiry, even though they'll all show up on your report. It's not going to ding your score as if, you did 6 different department store cards. That'll ding you 6 different times. What else do you have for us?
I've got a question I can ask you, Nick.
Okay.
Let's do this one. Do I need to go into debt in order to have a good credit score?
No, you don't. And that's a good question. A lot of people, think, well, a credit score is a debt score. And so the only way I can get good credit is by borrowing money. And, Dave Ramsey talks a lot about that. And I would hate to disagree with Dave Ramsey because he'd come here and set me straight. But you don't have to be in debt to build a good credit score. The secured card that I talked about, if you pay that off monthly on stuff you were going to buy anyway, like your gas, it'll show a credit history. It'll build your credit. Go into any debt. It's the same amount of money you would have spent on gas anyway. And so you're not paying any interest. You don't have a huge debt payment. You're not buying a car you can't afford or a house you can't afford. It's just building a credit history. So good question.
We have one more question from John. It says, to prevent credit frauds, is it okay to freeze and unfreeze your credit reports?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, what a freeze is when you put a freeze on your credit report. Anytime that's pulled, it's going to say that the person that pulls it or the company, like if you were applying for a loan at a bank and you had a credit freeze, they couldn't extend credit to you because of the credit freeze. And so that credit freeze would have to be removed by you before they could extend credit. And so in theory, what that would do, just I was saying, it would stop somebody from stealing entity and borrow a bunch of money that they were never going to pay back because they shouldn't be able to get credit from it. So, I don't know if there's, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Is there a cost associated with putting a freeze on it? Can certainly look into that, but I don't know that. But we can get back to you if you're interested in that.
I have another question. Are opening credit cards the only way people can build credits, or are there other ways?
No, it's not the only way. Anytime you have a credit relationship, a credit, you have an account. So, it could be a car loan, a mortgage loan, that's going to build credit. One thing we kind of talked about, but not really, things like boost, where you can essentially get credit for your utility payments and other things that you pay normally. And so it's not traditional credit, but they, in this Experian Boost, they give you credit for it. And so that can help people boost it. Now, different lenders might look at that differently. Some of them might say, well, we can't count that, or yeah, we'll go ahead and count that. But it does, and how effective that is, I don't know. I've never done that, but that's like a brand new thing. If you were interested in that, you could go to their website, and I'm sure they'd have more information on that. Good question.
I have another question here. If you don't pay your rent on time, can a landlord file an adverse report?
Part of the reason for that is it costs money to report. So a bank, to report the credit bureaus, we have to pay the credit bureaus money to report to them. And so a lot of times rentals don't. But where I do see it as a problem, again, is if you're, you're so late that they send it to collections, or they file a judgment against you, and then that shows up on your credit report. That will certainly negatively affect it. But they could report to a credit bureau, if it got to that point. So,
Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said there it's 3 main credit scores that FICO keeps track of. Is there one that's more important than the other 2?
Good question. No, they're not. They're all 3 important. Different lenders. Higher than the middle one will be higher too. So good question.
Is there any way that you can improve one credit score over the other, or is everything that you do kind of apply to each one?
Well, yeah, so good question. It depends on what's, again, being reported on different ones. So if you had a car loan that was only being reported to one bureau, and that maybe there was a late payment, or maybe there was a mistake on it, getting that fixed is only going to fix that score, because the other 2, maybe it wasn't reported on anyway, and so it wouldn't affect the other 2. So it has to be something that's being reported on the bureau for it to affect it.
I have another question too, Nick. So we've been talking a lot about the expense impact, but how does an income impact a credit score?
Yeah, good question. So income in itself doesn't affect your score. So if you, having a really high income doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a really high credit score. It's not associated in that way. So it may affect, where income comes in, is it may affect how high of a limit you can get on a card, which then may affect your utilization, or it may affect how much you borrow for a car loan or whatever type of loan. And then if you got into trouble, that's that much more debt. If you were heavily in debt, that would affect. But just your income itself, that's not going to affect your credit score.
All right. Does anyone in the audience have any more questions for Nick and Justine?
I have a question. Is there as a retired person who isn't getting a work wage any longer, is there anything that I should be aware of or work for differently than when I was working full time?
From like a credit report standpoint, or
Well, my bank is in a different state, and but I've had it for many years, and they've done good service. And I originally years ago had what they call the Jiffy loan. It's kind of like a loan that you would take out to repair things in your home, but this was done when I had full-time work and a good salary. So after I became retired, I was reluctant to ask them anything about getting a lower interest rate because I was concerned that when I originally qualified for the loan, it was for over $10,000. I never used all that, but I thought, okay, without that full-time good salary, it's going to come down. And recently I did talk to them, and it was a higher interest rate, and I wanted to get it down. And so they said, okay, we can do it, but it's going to have to be for a lower amount. So I got a lower interest rate, but I also got a smaller line of credit.
mm-hmm.
And, I'm glad I did it, but I lost that higher amount, that line of credit for like emergencies or,
Yeah.
So I kind of thought about it, after the fact, and thought, I wonder if I should have just left it alone, but it's already done. So in the future, are there things I should think about differently? I'm asking a question that I'm not completely sure what I'm asking, because it's like I'm looking in a dark room with no light.
Sure. Yeah, sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
Well, so I'm not sure the circumstances of that loan. I would say that, it's possible, and again, I don't know, but it's possible that the only reason they lowered that was just, the ratio of your total debt if you had used the whole line versus your income. And so, maybe the bigger line, would have put you too high of debt as in relation to your income. And so they wanted to lower that so they didn't put you in a tough spot. That would be, a thought. I don't know if that's the case, but,
Okay.
I think one thing to think about, and this maybe isn't necessarily just about credit reports, but, if you're applying for a loan or a line of credit or any of those things, oftentimes you will, because the way lenders look at it, they only look at so many features, right? So they only look at your income, and then usually your debt expenses and maybe rent, if you don't have a mortgage. And so, but of course that's not all we have to buy, right? I mean, we have cell phones, and we have car insurance, we have other things. Really what I can afford, whether it's, whether it's debt or whether it's just other things you're going to spend money on, really knowing kind of where your numbers are, because it's a big change from what you used to have. What a number maybe before that didn't seem that big might seem bigger now with reduced income. And so just kind of keeping that in mind would be my only thought. I can't think of one about really a credit report off the top of my head. Sorry if that wasn't very helpful.
No, it's okay. Like I said, I was asking a question that I'm not really sure what I'm asking. So,
Yeah.
so thank you.
All right, we have
You're welcome.
2 more questions.
Okay. Okay, here's a question. If you pay an arrears medical bill, will there be a report that the bill was paid off and thus reduce the impact on your credit score? Yeah, if that bill has gone to collections, when that's paid off, it should show paid. It'll still show on your credit report for a time, probably 7 years, that it went to collections, but then it'll show paid. And you know, medical collections are looked at a little differently than other collections, just because it's really easy to get into a medical collection. I've seen one is for a small dollar amount is $14. Somebody had a medical collection. Obviously, they would have paid it if they knew about it. They just didn't know about it. You know, you go to the hospital and there's 8 different providers or whatever. So you know, they paid it off and went about their way. But it will definitely show when those are paid off and no longer outstanding. That should go towards improving your score. Absolutely.
One more question. It says, does your bank offer a report of one's credit score if they have a bank account with you?
Currently, we don't. The only way, and part of the reason for that is traditionally to look at someone's credit, if it's not my own, you know, I can look at my own, but if I'm going to see someone else's credit, there has to be a reason. I can't just go out, and nobody can go out and just check your credit report. And so the way we're typically set up is there has to be a application for credit, and then we pull a credit report. You know, that I know there are other places, like some credit card companies give you your score if you have a credit card with them or whatever. We currently don't do that though.
And we have one more. It says, what services for account holders at your bank do you perform?
Can you maybe be a little more specific? I don't know if I understand your question.
Just waiting for the response. Just like how they would be able to ask for either of you, or
oh, if you wanted to talk to us, yeah, you can call or come into the bank and ask for me. My name's Nick Linford. The branch that I'm at is the East Side branch on Wyoming Boulevard and Centennial Hills Boulevard. And so, yeah, I can give you my phone number too. If you want to write it down, you can give me a call. I don't know if you're ready yet, but my direct line at my office is 577-3555.
all right, any other questions that we might have for Nick? All right, Nick, do you have any closing remarks? One thing that you would say would be the best thing to remember when it comes to managing your credit score?
Yeah, I would say the one thing to remember is really you've got to keep track of it. And so, you know, if you haven't looked at your own report, get a copy of your own report and really keep track of that. And so whether that's once a year with all 3 or throughout the year, you know, knowing what's in your report is the best way to building good credit and improving your credit. So.
All right. Well, if no one else has any other questions, we'll just stick around just a few minutes more, just in case you do. But I just want to again thank Nick and Justine for being here with us today and giving us all this great information. Again, this will be a month-long topic that we're going to be covering, which is finances. Next week on February 16th, we will have John Johnson and Demetra Kidd, also from Hilltop, talking about how you can protect your identity. And then on February 23rd, we have budgeting in the real world. So keep an eye open on our Facebook page, on our website for more information on how to join these presentations. Again, thank you, Nick and Justine, and thank you everyone that joined us. Have a wonderful night. Thank you so much.